The Admiral's daughter had never heard her own name. Not once in 7 years. Not the day she was born. Not the day her mother died. Not the day doctors told her father she never would. In a hospital corridor full of panicking voices, not a single person could reach her, except the new nurse, the one the staff treated as barely competent enough to hold a clipboard. When the Admiral collapsed and the seconds started counting down, she was the one who knelt in front of the little girl and started moving her hands. Not ordinary sign language. Something faster, sharper, something that looked to the one man watching from the edge of the crowd unmistakably military. He went still, because the real question wasn't who had taught her that. It was where a hospital nurse had learned to turn silence into a weapon. Before we begin, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. If stories about hidden heroes and second chances speak to you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. This is our channel, and this is her story. Jenna Alcott had learned to make herself smaller in exactly 11 months. Smaller shoulders, smaller voice, smaller steps down a hallway that still felt like somebody else's life. "You're doing it again," Dr. Vincent Hargrove said, not glancing up from his tablet. "Standing there like you're waiting for someone to give you permission." "I was waiting for you to finish the order," Jenna said. "I finished it 3 minutes ago." He tapped the screen and rotated it toward her as though she couldn't read it upside down from 6 feet away. She could. She'd read documents upside down across a table from men who would have killed her for less. "Try to keep up." She said nothing. Bright cobalt scrubs, sleeves pushed to the elbow, a thin pale scar cutting across her left cheekbone that nobody at Port Sentry Naval Medical Center had ever inquired about. She kept her badge straight. She kept her hands still. Stillness was a skill like anything else. 11 months of nursing school compressed into a year and a half, and still every attending on this floor treated her like she'd wandered in off the street. Today was worse than most because today the entire south courtyard of the base had been transformed into a stage. Rear Admiral Thomas Mercer was retiring after 33 years, and the Navy did not do that quietly. Folding chairs in white rows, a band warming up somewhere behind the color guard, bunting the exact blue of the sky it was attempting to match. Jenna had volunteered for the medical tent shift because it meant 6 hours outside instead of 6 hours under Hargrove's tablet, and because volunteering for things nobody wanted was easier than explaining why she never volunteered for the things everybody did. She saw the girl before she saw the Admiral. Small, maybe 7, in a navy dress a size too formal for a lawn full of grass stains waiting to happen. She stood apart from the folding chairs, hands pressed flat against her thighs. Eyes moving fast across the crowd. The way eyes move when they're doing all the listening the ears can't. A woman in a Navy family liaison blazer hovered near her, phone in hand, distracted. Jenna clocked the girl's hands. Not fidgeting. Reading. Every few seconds, the small fingers twitched into a shape and then released, like the beginning of a word she'd decided not to finish in public. "That's Lily Mercer," said the medic beside her, a young corpsman named Delgado who talked more than the job required. "Admiral's daughter. Deaf since she was 2. Meningitis." He said it the way people say things they've heard secondhand, and repeated so many times they've stopped hearing themselves say it. "Rough for a kid. All this noise she can't even use." "She's not using her ears," Jenna said quietly. "She's using everything else." Delgado glanced at her, surprised she'd said anything at all. Jenna didn't explain. She'd learned a long time ago, in a stairwell in Baltimore with her hand raised in a signal only 3 other people in the world could read, that a kid who can't hear the room learns to read it better than anyone standing in it. The ceremony started. A chaplain's blessing nobody in the 3rd row could hear over a low-flying transport plane. A speech from a 2-star general, who used the word legacy 4 times in 90 seconds. Rear Admiral Mercer sat in the front row in dress whites, back straight, hands folded, the posture of a man who had spent 3 decades being watched and had made peace with it. Jenna watched him instead of the podium. Old habit. You don't watch the man giving the speech. You watch the man who's supposed to be safe. His color was wrong. Not dramatically, not yet. A grayness under the tan, a stillness in his jaw that wasn't attention. It was effort. His right hand, resting on his knee, had gone from folded to gripping. Jenna's pulse didn't spike. It dropped into the register she remembered from doorways she'd kicked in at 4 in the morning, where the world slowed down and every detail arrived one at a time, perfectly clear. "Delgado," she said low. "Watch the Admiral's hand." "What about it?" "Just watch it." He did. 30 seconds later, his eyebrows went up. Is he? Get the bag. She was already moving, cutting between two rows of folding chairs with a particular kind of walk that doesn't look urgent from a distance and covers ground faster than a run. She reached him 4 seconds before he went down. Not a collapse so much as a controlled failure. His body doing what 33 years of training told it to do even as it quit. Knees first, hand out to catch himself. A man trying to fall with dignity. She got a shoulder under his arm before his head hit the grass. Around her, the front row exploded into motion and noise. Chairs scraping, someone shouting for a corpseman, the general's speech dying mid-sentence into stunned silence. And underneath all of it, a single small sound. Not a word. A cry with no shape to it, high and raw, the sound of someone who has never once heard her own voice trying to make herself heard anyway. Lily Mercer was 6 feet away, both hands pressed to her mouth, eyes locked on her father's body on the ground, and no one, not the liaison officer, not the chaplain, not a single one of the 200 people now converging on the front row, was looking at her at all. Jenna looked at her for exactly 1 second. Two strangers who had never met understood the same thing from opposite sides of a crisis. That the person everyone was about to forget was the one who needed someone most. Delgado, airway breathing. Get his legs up. Jenna's voice came out flat and certain. A voice that didn't belong to the nurse who apologized for standing in doorways. I've got her. She crossed to Lily and dropped to one knee, so their eyes were level. Cobalt scrubs pooling in the grass. And she did not reach for the girl's hand the way the liaison officer would have, the way a stranger comforts a child by grabbing. She raised both her own hands instead, palms out, fingers steady, and she began to move them. Not the sign language Lily's school had spent 2 years teaching her, careful and rounded and slow. Something faster, something clipped and precise, built for distance and noise and chaos. Built by men who had once needed to tell each other hold position, and man down, and move now, without making a single sound that could get them killed. Lily's eyes went wide. Her hands dropped from her mouth. And across the churn of medics and family in navy blue, one man near the color guard, not moving toward the Admiral, not moving at all, went completely, dangerously still, watching Jenna's hands like he'd just heard a voice he recognized from another life. Ma'am, I need you to step back. A young ensign had a hand out toward Jenna, palm up, the universal gesture for civilians who don't understand what they're looking at. I'm hospital staff, Jenna said without looking away from Lily's hands. And she's about to lose the only person in this crowd she can actually communicate with. Give me 30 seconds. The ensign hesitated, then backed off, because something in her voice made backing off feel like the correct decision. Behind her, Delgado had the Admiral's legs elevated and a bag mask ready, calling vitals to the ambulance crew jogging across the lawn with a gurney. BP's dropping. Pulses thready, skins cold. His voice cracked on the last word. 23 years old, and he had never run a real code outside a simulation lab. Jenna's hands kept moving in front of Lily. Your dad. Doctors are helping. Stay with me. Look at me, not them. Lily's breathing slowed by half. Her eyes, wet and wide, never left Jenna's face. What is that? The liaison officer asked, arriving too late and too breathless to be useful. Is that ASL? She uses ASL. It's close enough for now, Jenna said, which was true and also not remotely the whole truth. The signs she was using shared a grammar with the ones Lily's school had taught her, the way two dialects of the same language share a grammar, but the speed and economy of movement belonged to a different world entirely. A world of flashbangs and stairwells and hand signals passed silently between 4 operators clearing a floor where one wrong word spoken aloud could get somebody killed. The gurney arrived. 2 paramedics transferred the Admiral with the practiced roughness of people who had done it 1,000 times and had 30 seconds to do it again. I'm riding with him, Jenna said, standing, scooping Lily up onto her hip in the same motion. A small body gone rigid with fear, and then incrementally less rigid because the person carrying her hadn't stopped signing even while walking. You're not cleared for transport, the liaison officer said. She's going into shock, and the only person she trusts right now is walking away from her at a dead run, Jenna said. You want to explain to the Admiral why his daughter was left standing on a lawn? Nobody had an answer for that. Jenna climbed into the ambulance with Lily still on her hip. And across the churn of the scene, the still man near the color guard finally moved. Not toward the Admiral, but toward a black sedan parked at the edge of the lot, phone already at his ear. The bay doors of the ER hit the wall as the gurney came through, and the calm of the last 4 minutes evaporated into fluorescent noise. 66-year-old male, syncope during a public event. BP 82/42 and dropping, diaphoretic, guarding the abdomen, the lead paramedic called out, and a small crowd of blue scrubs converged around the gurney like iron filings finding a magnet. Dr. Vincent Hargrove was at the center of it in seconds, because Dr. Vincent Hargrove made a point of being at the center of anything with an audience. "Get me an ultrasound and 2 large bore lines," he snapped. "Someone page vascular surgery." "What's the story?" "Sudden collapse. No chest pain reported prior. Abdominal tenderness presenting now," Jenna said, setting Lily down carefully in the family alcove with a promise scrolled quick in the air. "Stay. I'll be right there," and moving to the bedside with the ease of someone whose hands had already started working before her mind caught up. "I didn't ask you," Hargrove said, not even glancing at her badge. "I asked the paramedics." "He's crashing," Jenna said. "His abdomen's rigid on the left and his pressure's in freefall. That's not cardiac. That's a bleed. I'm aware of what a rigid abdomen indicates." "Thank you." Hargrove's voice carried the specific irritation of a man being told something accurate by someone he'd already decided couldn't possibly know it. "Ultrasound's coming. Get vitals every 2 minutes and stay out of the way." Jenna stepped back, not because he was right, because arguing burned seconds the Admiral didn't have, and she had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to lose a fight for someone's life was to spend it fighting the wrong person first. The portable ultrasound wand went to the Admiral's abdomen. Hargrove's face changed almost immediately, the practiced composure cracking into something closer to alarm. "Free fluid. A lot of it." He straightened. "Get me a type and cross for units. Activate the massive transfusion protocol. Where is vascular surgery?" 15 minutes out, a nurse said. "They're finishing a case." "He doesn't have 15 minutes, Jenna said. "I have this handled," Hargrove said, already reaching for a central line kit with hands that were moving a half-second too fast, a half-second too unsteady. The hands of a man whose training had prepared him for 100 things, and not quite for this one. Jenna watched the monitor. Watched the pressure keep sliding. 78, 73, 66. The numbers dropping the way a fuel gauge drops on final approach when there isn't going to be enough runway. And in the alcove across the room, Lily Mercer had both hands pressed flat against the glass, watching the only father she had left disappear behind a wall of blue scrubs that couldn't tell her anything at all. Outside in the ambulance bay, the still man from the color guard leaned against his sedan with his phone pressed to his ear, watching the automatic doors slide open and shut. "It's Navarro," he said when the line connected. "I need you to run a name for me." "Alcott, Jenna. Naval Medical Staff, works out of Port Sentry." A pause. "No, I'm not being paranoid. I watched a hospital nurse run federal tactical hand signals on a 7-year-old like she's done it in her sleep for a decade. I want to know why." He didn't go in. Not yet. Special Agent Marco Navarro had spent 12 years learning that the fastest way to spook something worth catching was to walk straight at it. And whatever Jenna Alcott was, she was worth catching carefully. Inside, the massive transfusion protocol was moving at the speed hospitals move when a bad outcome is no longer a possibility but a countdown. Bags of blood cracked open and hung. A resident fumbled a central line kit and swore under her breath. Hargrove's voice had climbed half an octave, the sound of a man narrating his own competence louder than the situation required. "Pressure's 64, the monitor tech called. He's tachycardic, 138 and climbing." "I know what the monitor says," Hargrove snapped. "I can read a monitor." Jenna's eyes moved from the screen to the Admiral's face, gone the color of old paper, to the loose drape of his hand off the side of the gurney. Fingers that had gripped his own knee in fear 20 minutes ago, now barely twitching. She had seen this exact sequence before. In a farmhouse basement outside Richmond. In a stairwell in Baltimore. In the back of a van that smelled like copper and diesel. Jenna knew with the specific certainty of someone who had memorized the shape of dying that Hargrove had roughly 90 seconds before this stopped being a bleed he could manage and became one he couldn't. Not a word yet, though. 3 steps closer instead, positioning herself where her hands could reach the crash cart without anyone noticing she'd already decided to use it. "Pressure's 56, the monitor tech called, and this time her voice had the particular flatness of someone reciting a number she didn't want to believe. Hargrove's hands stilled over the central line kit. Not from confidence. From the specific paralysis of a man who has run out of the next correct step and hasn't yet admitted it to himself. Vascular still 8 minutes out, a nurse said. Should I page again? Give it a minute, Hargrove said, which was not an answer to anything. Jenna crossed the last 3 steps and put both hands flat against the Admiral's abdomen, low and to the left, and pressed down with the specific, brutal, controlled force of someone who had done this before with far worse lighting and far less help. What are you doing? Hargrove's voice cracked upward. Buying him the 8 minutes, Jenna said. Direct compression on the source. It won't fix it. It'll slow it. He doesn't have 8 minutes without this. You cannot just put your hands on a patient. Pressure's 50 now, the tech said. And the room went very quiet in the way rooms go quiet right before someone either lives or doesn't. Then help me or get out of my way, Jenna said. And there was nothing in her voice anymore that resembled a nurse asking permission. It was a voice built for exactly one purpose, cutting through noise and panic and rank until only the next necessary action was left standing. 2 units running wide open. Trendelenburg. Someone call the OR and tell them they're not waiting for vascular. They're prepping now. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved, because the person giving orders in a level 1 trauma bay was not the attending physician, and every set of eyes in the room had gone to Hargrove to see what he'd do about it. What he did was nothing, which for the first time all day was the correct call, because there was nothing better to do, and some small surviving part of him understood that fast enough to keep his mouth shut. The resuscitation nurse tilted the bed. The blood ran wide open. Jenna's hands stayed exactly where they were, arms shaking with the effort of sustained pressure, sweat sliding down her temple, her eyes locked on the monitor with the flat, unblinking focus of someone counting down a fuse she couldn't see. 52, 57, 61. Pressure's climbing, the tech said, disbelief threading through relief. 66, 69. Nobody cheered. Nobody in that room had the composure left to celebrate a number that still meant a man was actively dying, just more slowly. But the tightness in the room loosened by 1 degree, enough for people to remember to breathe. Or is ready, someone called from the doorway. They said now, not when vascular gets here. Then we move, Jenna said, and stepped back from the gurney at last, her hands slick and trembling, the exact stillness she'd worn for the last 4 minutes cracking now that it was no longer needed. The gurney rolled. The room emptied around it in the choreography of people who had somewhere urgent to be and had just been given, however briefly, permission to move fast. Hargrove stayed behind, staring at Jenna across 6 feet of empty trauma bay. Where did you learn to do that? It wasn't really a question. It came out low and strange, stripped of the irritation from 20 minutes ago, replaced by something closer to unease. Nursing school, Jenna said. Nursing school doesn't teach manual hemorrhage control on a rigid abdomen while giving verbal orders to an attending physician. His eyes went to her hands, still shaking slightly, to the thin pale scar across her cheekbone, to the way she stood with her weight balanced, evenly on both feet even now, spent. I want to know who you are. I'm the nurse who just bought your patient 40 minutes he didn't have 20 seconds ago, Jenna said, and walked past him toward the alcove where a small girl in a navy dress had watched the entire thing through glass, both hands still pressed flat against it, and had not once looked away. In the hallway outside, Special Agent Marco Navarro stood with his phone against his ear again, listening to a voice on the other end read him a personnel file that contained exactly 1 photograph and almost nothing else. A name, a hospital, and a licensing date 11 months old, with everything before it stamped in red letters he'd seen only a handful of times in 12 years of federal service. He lowered the phone slowly. Jenna Alcott, he said to no one, testing the name against a memory that had just clicked into focus with the force of a door slamming shut. I know exactly who you were. He didn't move toward the alcove. He watched instead, the way he'd been trained to watch, from a distance that revealed everything without disturbing it. Jenna crouched in front of Lily and raised her hands again, slower this time, the adrenaline bleeding out of her fingers now that the crisis had a heartbeat monitor on it instead of a stopwatch. Your dad is stronger than the doctors expected. He's going upstairs to get fixed. I'm not leaving you. Lily's face crumpled, not into the wide panic from the lawn, but into something smaller and more private. The specific grief of a child who has spent 4 years learning that adults say reassuring things with their mouths that their eyes don't always mean. She studied Jenna's hands like she was checking them against a memory too, though she couldn't have known why the shapes felt different from the ones her interpreter used at school. Faster, leaner, stripped of the softening flourishes teachers add for children. No questions came. Not yet. Just two small fists closing around cobalt blue scrub fabric and holding on. "You're safe," Jenna said aloud, more to herself than to a girl who couldn't hear her, and then caught herself and signed it too, because saying it wasn't the same as being understood. Hargrove appeared at the edge of the alcove, arms crossed, watching them both with an expression that had shifted twice in the last 10 minutes and hadn't settled anywhere comfortable yet. "I'm filing an incident report," he said. "Fine," Jenna said without looking up. "You put your hands on a patient outside your scope. You gave clinical orders in a code you had no authority to run. And he's alive to complain about it," Jenna said. "File whatever you want." "I intend to." But he lingered a moment longer than the sentence required, his eyes tracking the specific efficiency of her hands as she checked Lily's pulse at the wrist without breaking the rhythm of signing to her at the same time. Two skilled tasks running in parallel, like they cost her nothing at all. It was the kind of competence that didn't fit the story he'd built about her in his head over the last 11 months. And men like Hargrove did not enjoy discovering their stories were wrong. He left without finishing whatever he'd been about to say next. Rear Admiral Thomas Mercer came out of surgery 4 hours later with a portion of his spleen removed, a repaired splenic artery, and a surgeon who told the family twice that another 20 minutes on that lawn would have ended differently. Jenna heard it secondhand from Delgado in the break room over coffee that had been sitting on the burner since morning. "They're saying you saved his life before a scalpel even got near him," Delgado said, still a little wide-eyed. "Hargrove's telling anyone who'll listen that you overstepped." "Hargrove's not wrong that I overstepped," Jenna said. "He's wrong about what would have happened if I hadn't." The break room door opened. Not Hargrove. A man in a dark suit that fit the way suits fit people who wear them for work rather than weddings. A small gold badge clipped to his belt. Eyes that moved once around the room and settled on Jenna with the particular stillness of someone who had already decided what he was going to say before he walked in. "Ms. Alcott," he said. "Special Agent Marco Navarro. You have a minute?" Delgado found somewhere else to be with the speed of a man who recognized federal law enforcement when it walked into a room. "I'm on shift," Jenna said, which was true and also not an answer. "I'll be quick." Navarro pulled out the chair across from her and sat without being invited, which told her almost as much about him as the badge had. "That was federal tactical hand code you ran on that little girl. Not civilian ASL, not a hybrid, not something you picked up from a video tutorial. I've used that exact system on 8 operational deployments. It's taught in exactly one place to exactly one kind of unit. And it isn't nursing school." Jenna's face didn't move. 11 months of practice had made that easier than it used to be. "I don't know what you think you saw." "I think I saw someone hold a compression on a dying man's abdomen for 4 straight minutes without her hands shaking until it was over," Navarro said. "I think I saw her run a trauma bay like she'd commanded worse rooms than that one. And I think I saw her sign a 7-year-old through the worst afternoon of her life in a language built for people who can't afford to make a sound." He leaned forward slightly. "I pulled your file. There's a licensing date 11 months back, a hospital, a photograph. There's almost nothing before it. That's not a career, Ms. Alcott. That's a wall somebody built on purpose. Maybe I just don't have much of a story. Everybody has a story. Most people's aren't classified." Navarro let that sit for a moment. "I'm not here to expose you. I'm here because in 12 years of federal service, I have met exactly 4 people who move the way you move. And I'd like to know how a 5th ended up in scrubs instead of on a task force." Jenna's coffee had gone cold in her hands. She set it down. "What do you want right now?" "Nothing." Navarro stood, straightened his jacket, and slid a card across the table. "Plain government issue, a number and nothing else. But the Admiral you saved today used to run joint operations with the exact kind of unit that teaches that code. He's going to want to know who pulled him back from the edge of that lawn. And when he asks, you can either tell him the truth, or you can let me stand there while you lie to a man who spent 33 years learning to spot people who are lying to him." He left before she could answer, which she suspected was deliberate. 2 floors up, in a recovery room that smelled like antiseptic and hospital coffee, Rear Admiral Thomas Mercer opened his eyes for the first time since surgery to find his daughter asleep in a chair beside his bed. One small hand still fisted around a corner of cobalt blue fabric that didn't belong to any nurse's uniform he could immediately place, and a woman he didn't recognize sitting quietly across the room, watching the door the way people watch doors when they've spent a career learning which ones open wrong. "Who," he rasped, "are you?" Jenna stood. "Jenna Alcott. I'm one of your nurses, sir." Your daughter didn't want to leave the floor, and nobody else could communicate with her, so I stayed. Mercer's eyes moved to Lily, small and asleep, still gripping the scrub fabric like a lifeline, and something in his face softened before the exhaustion pulled it back under. She communicates with you, he said. It wasn't quite a question. She hasn't communicated with a stranger in 2 years. She's not talking, sir. She's signing. There's a difference for her. I know the difference. Mercer's gaze sharpened despite the morphine dragging at the edges of it. A man accustomed to noticing things even half-conscious. I also know Federal Tactical Sign when I see it, Ms. Alcott, because I spent 4 years running joint task forces that used it. My daughter doesn't know ASL that fast. Neither does her interpreter. He held her eyes. Neither, I suspect, do most nurses. Jenna said nothing, which in that particular silence was an answer all its own. The monitor above his bed chose that moment to change its rhythm. A soft, insistent alarm that pulled both their attention at once. His heart rate had climbed. His dressing, when Jenna lifted the blanket to check, had gone dark at the edges in a way that had nothing to do with normal post-surgical drainage. He's rebleeding, she said, already reaching for the call button. Get me the on-call surgeon now. The response came fast, but not fast enough to outrun a second crisis, stacking on top of the first. Hargrove arrived at a jog, paged from 2 floors away, and stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds doing the math on a situation he didn't have the experience to solve quickly. His eyes darted between the monitor and the dressing and Jenna's hands already applying pressure without waiting for an order. We need to call it and get him back to the OR, Jenna said. His pressure's dropping the same way it did on the lawn. This isn't a slow bleed. It's a fast one. I need imaging first. We can't just... You don't have time for imaging. Her voice cut through the room, low and absolutely certain. And for the second time that day, Hargrove found himself standing in a doorway, watching a nurse make a call he was too slow to make himself. Lily had woken at the alarm and gone rigid in her chair, both hands pressed to her mouth again. Jenna spared her exactly 1 second, one sharp, reassuring sign. Stay. Safe. I've got him. Before her focus snapped back to the bed. Page Vascular. Tell them it's the same patient, same field, and tell them I'm not waiting on imaging that costs him 10 more minutes he doesn't have. Jenna's hands stayed locked in place, steady where Hargrove's would have shaken. Sir, I need you to trust me on this one. Hargrove hesitated exactly as long as it took to look at Mercer's monitor, at the number sliding the wrong direction with a speed that made the decision for him whether he liked it or not. Page Vascular, he said finally, quiet, the fight gone out of his voice. Do what she says. It worked. The surgical team arrived at a run. The Admiral went back down the hallway on a gurney with Jenna's hand still pressed against him until the last possible second, and the bleeding this time was found and closed before it became a story with a worse ending. In the corridor afterward, Navarro watched the entire sequence from 20 feet away with his arms crossed and his expression very carefully blank, filing away one more piece of a picture that was rapidly becoming impossible to explain any other way. Navarro found her on the roof access stairwell an hour later. The one place in the hospital Jenna had discovered 11 months ago was reliably empty because nobody used stairs when there were elevators, and she had never entirely stopped needing somewhere to be alone when her hands wouldn't stop shaking. You're good at your job, he said, letting the door close behind him. The nursing job, I mean. I watched you work that second bleed. That wasn't muscle memory from something else. That was skill you built here on this floor the hard way. Is there a point coming? Jenna said, not turning around. The point is, I don't think you're hiding because you're dangerous. Navarro came to stand at the railing beside her, looking out over the parking lot instead of at her, giving her the kind of space that people who understand fear give each other without needing to name it. I think you're hiding because something went wrong, and you decided the safest thing you could do with what you know is bury it under something that saves lives instead. Jenna's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me. I know the unit that teaches that hand code. I know it's small enough that everyone in it eventually knows everyone else who's ever been in it. I know 5 years ago, a fugitive apprehension team out of the Baltimore field office lost a hostage recovery that went sideways in a stairwell exactly like this one. And I know the agent who ran point on that operation filed for early separation 12 days later and was never heard from again in federal law enforcement. He finally looked at her. The file said the hostage was a child. Deaf. 8 years old. The stairwell went very quiet. Her name was Iris, Jenna said, and her voice, when it finally came, had none of the flatness it wore on the trauma bay floor. It came out cracked, low, 12 years younger than she was. We had 4 seconds of silence to move on the fugitive before he heard us coming. I gave the signal. My partner read it wrong. He moved a half-second early. She stared at the parking lot without seeing it. The fugitive heard him, grabbed Iris before any of us could close the distance. She spent 45 minutes as a hostage in a stairwell because I trusted a hand signal I'd taught him myself, and he didn't execute it clean. She lived, Navarro said quietly. It wasn't a question. He'd read the file. She lived because eventually he got tired, and I talked him down, and it ended without anyone dying. Jenna's hands on the railing had gone white-knuckled. But I stood in that stairwell for 45 minutes signing to a deaf 8-year-old, telling her she was safe, telling her I had her, while a man twice my size held a weapon against her ribs. And I have never once, not for a single day since, stopped hearing the sound she couldn't make when it was over. This high, broken, silent scream that never actually came out of her mouth because she'd never made a sound in her life and didn't know how to start even then. She turned to face him for the first time. So yes, I left. I filed for separation. I let the file close, and I decided the only version of myself I trusted to be near another frightened kid again was one who couldn't carry a weapon into the room. And today you signed a different scared kid through the worst afternoon of her life, Navarro said. In the same language, in the same crisis. And you didn't freeze. I almost did. The admission cost her something visible. On that lawn, for about half a second, I saw Iris's face instead of Lily's. I almost couldn't move. But you did move. I moved. Jenna exhaled, long and unsteady. Because the alternative was letting her stand there alone in the one moment in her whole life where somebody needed to reach her and couldn't. And I've spent 5 years making sure that never happens to another kid on my watch. Even if it means everyone finding out what I used to be. Navarro studied her for a long moment, the careful assessing look of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about a case. The Admiral's awake, he said finally. Stable. And he asked me specifically to bring you up when you were ready. Not because he's angry, Ms. Alcott. Because a man who spent 33 years reading rooms just watched somebody read his daughter better than anyone else on Earth has managed in 4 years. And he wants to know who taught you how. Jenna looked at the door to the stairwell, then back at the city spread out beyond the railing, gray and ordinary, and utterly unaware of the 2 people standing above it deciding whether 11 months of careful smallness was about to end. Okay, she said finally. Take me up. Rear Admiral Mercer was sitting upright when they came in. Color returned. A stubborn set to his jaw that suggested he'd fought the nursing staff on every attempt to keep him lying flat. Lily sat cross-legged in the chair beside him, drawing something on the back of a discharge form with a stolen pen, and she looked up the second Jenna crossed the threshold, her whole face brightening in a way that made something in Jenna's chest ache. Alcott. Mercer gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Agent Navarro tells me you two had a productive conversation. Productive is one word for it, sir. I've heard worse ones used about conversations I've had with Navarro. A ghost of a smile, gone as fast as it appeared. I'll get to the point, because I understand pretending not to notice things isn't your strong suit anymore today. You ran federal tactical hand code on my daughter. You ran a trauma resuscitation like you'd commanded worse rooms. And you did both without once looking like it cost you anything, until apparently it did. His eyes flicked briefly toward the stairwell door 2 floors down that he couldn't have seen, but somehow understood anyway. So I'm asking you directly, the way I'd ask any operator standing in front of me. What's your background and why is it buried? Jenna looked at Lily first. The girl had stopped drawing. She was watching Jenna's face with the specific intensity of a child who has learned to read everything because she can hear nothing. And something about that stillness made the decision easier than Jenna expected. Fugitive Apprehension Task Force, Jenna said. U.S. Marshals Service. 7 years on the team, 2 as lead on high-risk warrant service. I left after an operation went wrong and a child got hurt because of a signal I taught that got executed badly under pressure. I didn't trust myself with a weapon in a room with a scared kid again. So I found a job where the only thing in my hands was the ability to help, instead of the ability to end something. She held his gaze. I didn't plan on ever using that hand code again. Today didn't leave me a choice. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. The particular quiet of a man doing arithmetic with someone else's pain. You saved my life on that lawn before a single doctor touched me, he said finally. And then you spent the worst 4 hours of my daughter's short life being the one person in this building who could actually reach her. I don't know what regulation you broke walking a civilian nursing badge through a federal tactical intervention. And frankly, Ms. Alcott, I don't care. His voice roughened. 33 years I've watched this Navy build people into weapons, and then discard them the second the mission's over. Like the skill was the only part of them worth keeping. You didn't throw yours away. You just pointed it somewhere quieter. Lily set down her pen. She slid off the chair, crossed the small room, and stopped directly in front of Jenna, close enough that Jenna had to look down to meet her eyes. Small hands came up, careful and deliberate, shaping a question that had clearly been building since the lawn. Why do you know my language better than my teacher does? Jenna's throat tightened. She raised her own hands and answered as honestly as she knew how. Because someone taught it to me for a different reason. And I never forgot how much it mattered. Lily considered that with the grave seriousness only children bring to grief they don't yet have words for, then reached out and took Jenna's hand in both of hers. Small fingers wrapping around a palm that had spent a decade learning to hold weapons, and had spent the last 11 months relearning what else it could hold instead. Word moved through Port Sentry Naval Medical Center the way it always does in hospitals. Faster than any official channel, twisted a little more with every retelling, until by the next morning half the staff believed Jenna Alcott had once been Secret Service, and the other half had her pegged for CIA. Nobody had the story exactly right. Nobody needed to. What mattered was that the nurse who'd spent 11 months apologizing for standing in doorways had, in one afternoon, stopped a hemorrhage with her bare hands, run a resuscitation over an attending physician's objections, and reached a child that an entire hospital full of trained professionals hadn't been able to reach in 4 years. Hargrove found her at the nurse's station 2 days later, Mercer's discharge paperwork in hand, and stood there long enough that Jenna finally looked up. I filed a correction to my incident report, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. I wrote that your intervention was clinically appropriate and likely prevented a fatal outcome. A pause, awkward and unpracticed, the sound of a man saying words he didn't have much experience saying. I also wrote that I was slow to act and that you weren't. That took guts, Jenna said, and meant it. It took getting yelled at by a 2-star general's chief of staff for 45 minutes, mostly. A dry, unwilling, almost smile. For what it's worth, Alcott, I was wrong about you. Not just about the hand code. About all of it. I decided you weren't competent before I ever gave you a chance to prove otherwise, because it was easier than admitting I didn't know everything either. I've had worse apologies, Jenna said. I imagine you have. He hesitated at the edge of the station like there was more he wanted to say, and hadn't found a way into it yet. The Admiral wants to see you before he's discharged. Says it's important. She found Mercer in his room an hour later, dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with the specific restless energy of a man who had spent 3 decades being in charge of things and did not enjoy waiting for paperwork to release him. Lily sat beside him, a small overnight bag already packed, her drawing from 2 days ago now taped to the wall above the bed. A rough crayon sketch of 2 figures with their hands raised toward each other, fingers shaped into signs even an untrained eye could recognize as safe. I made a few calls, Mercer said without preamble, in the direct manner of a man who had never once in 33 years opened with small talk. About you. About your old unit. About what happens to an operator who separates the way you did, quietly, with a story that closes clean and leaves nothing behind for anyone to find. Jenna's stomach tightened. Sir, I'm not looking to go back. I'm not offering that. He held up a hand. I spent this hospital stay thinking about something you said, or didn't say, in that stairwell. Navarro told me most of it, in case you're wondering how thoroughly a federal agent reports to a retired flag officer he respects. You didn't leave because you stopped being good at protecting people. You left because you decided the only room you trusted yourself to protect people in anymore was one with a hospital bed instead of a doorway. He gestured toward the crayon drawing on the wall. But you're still the only person in this entire hospital who can actually reach a scared deaf child in the worst moment of her life. That's not a skill you should have to bury just because the last time you used it, something went wrong that wasn't your fault. What are you suggesting? A program, Mercer said. Here at Port Sentry, and eventually across the naval hospital system if it works the way I think it will. A protocol for reaching deaf and nonverbal patients. Kids, veterans with combat-related hearing loss, anyone the standard emergency procedures fail. Built around the exact kind of fast, precise, tactical communication you used on my daughter. Trained staff on every shift, so no other family ever has to watch their child stand alone in a crowd of people who can't reach her. He met her eyes, steady. I want you to build it, and I want you to run it. Jenna looked at Lily, who had gone very still, watching the shape of the conversation even without hearing a word of it. Sensing, the way children sense things that matter. That's not hiding what I used to be, Jenna said slowly. That's using it. That's the idea, Mercer said. Lily tugged at Jenna's sleeve. When Jenna crouched to her level, small hands rose again, careful and sure, shaping words she'd clearly been practicing since the drawing went up on the wall. Will you still be my nurse? Jenna's throat closed for a second, before she found the shape of an answer worth giving. I'll be more than that. I'll make sure nobody like you ever stands alone again. 3 weeks later, the first sign on the new office door read Silent Response, Emergency Communication Program, in letters plain enough that nobody would ever mistake them for anything but exactly what they were. Jenna still wore the bright cobalt blue scrubs. She still walked the same halls she'd spent 11 months trying to disappear into. But she walked them differently now. Shoulders back, hands steady, no longer smaller than she needed to be. The lesson she carried out of that stairwell, out of a silent scream she never stopped hearing and a crayon drawing taped above a hospital bed, was simple enough to fit in one sentence, though it took her 5 years to believe it. The things that break us are sometimes the only things equipped to save someone else, if we're brave enough to stop hiding them. If this story moved you, hit like and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that the past they're running from might be exactly what someone else needs them to bring back. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next hidden hero waiting to be found.